Oh, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Marcus Andrews. I'm the Chair of Audit and Governance Committee. Welcome to our meeting on the 5th of September 2024. Before we progress any further, we'll just ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Please, if a fire alarm sounds this evening, could everyone make their way to the fire assembly point at the front of the building in the car park? And finally, if please could you ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before we go into the actual agenda of the meeting, I would like to say a few words reference Councillor Castle, who sadly passed away since our last meeting, and indeed his funeral was a couple of days ago. Councillor Castle only joined the committee in May 2023, and he was still learning the ropes. He did assist me particularly on 2 or 3 pre-meetings for this committee during the time that Councillor Connolly, the Vice Chair, was not available. And indeed, that briefing probably nearly was needed, because on one meeting when Councillor Connolly couldn't be here in person and I was stuck in traffic and arrived 2 or 3 minutes late, he was nearly thrust into chairing A&G. There will be a full tribute to Councillor Castle at the full council meeting in October. But what I think we should do is take a few seconds of contemplation and remember Councillor Castle by turning off our microphones and remaining silent for 15 or 20 seconds. So if we just have a pause, please. Thank you. Agenda item number 1, apologies. Have we do any apologies this evening, please?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Tarling for this evening and from Councillor Beasley. Councillor Beasley has been substituted by Councillor Cameron Adams.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, yeah, well, I'll move the microphone a bit nearer. Perhaps that'll work.
You can hear me okay. Right. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, there's none. And everybody wants to indicate now. Fine. Reference item 4, confirmation of the minutes. Now, the minutes of the last meeting on the 25th of July have been circulated, and obviously we will I will be seeking approval shortly, but subject to councillors agreeing them, I would like the committee to be aware that the answer given to the public question from Mr. McClinsky is being reconsidered by the officer who prepared the answer, and any clarification, if required, will be presented to the meeting of this committee on the 17th of October 2024 of this committee. In terms of the minutes themselves that are being circulated, I do believe Councillor Claire Waite has got one query or comment to make. Councillor Waite.
Thank you, Marcus. Yes, so it's at the bottom of page 9. We have Peter Barber, the external auditor, referring to Children's Services receiving an adequate Ofsted rating, which resulted in an intervention. I would have thought it was perhaps an inadequate rating, which would have led to that. So perhaps either he misspoke or we sort of misrecorded it. But either way, if we could sort of note that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. But apart from that, would you be willing to propose accepting the minutes?
Happy to propose.
Somebody could second it for the record. Councillor Phipps, thank you. Okay, that's accepting the minutes with obviously that clarification I mentioned earlier. Section 5, public issues. Do we have any questions, statements or petitions?
There's no petitions or questions for this meeting, Chair, but we do have 2 public statements received from Mr. Redman. He's not in attendance to read those out, so I will do so on his behalf. Statement 1. In 2023, a procurement decision record was issued for the temporary catering van at Highcliffe Castle. The council would not release the names and businesses mentioned on the PDR because it was considered commercially sensitive information. Information Governance's decision was referred to the Information Commissioner's Office, and the council released the information quickly when challenged by the ICO, without requiring the ICO to make a decision. Commercial sensitivity is not a catch-all reason for not publishing PDRs, and I hope this committee and council will review this decision and publish PDRs to help transparency and accountability. I thought this was a requirement when PDRs replace waivers. The second statement received is: the 3-line defence detection system has a fundamental flaw. It is retrospective. It will not prevent non-compliance and will only detect non-compliance if stumbled across after it happens. The 3-line defence detection system would not prevent the Bayside scandal happening again. No manager or service director is going to report themselves for non-compliance. Strategic procurement will be oblivious to what is happening unless a PDR is raised, and internal audit will be a year or so behind the event when non-compliance may be picked up through one of their audits. The council would not waste taxpayers' money if it had proactive controls to prevent non-compliance in the first instance. Knowing all PDRs will be published would help.
Thank you for that. As you know, with statements, we can't discuss or debate those, but obviously item 7 on our agenda is to do with procurement. This meeting is one of our non-core meetings. So basically the 2 items we've next got on the agenda are learning and informing and training items. And therefore, without any further ado, I will go on to item 6. It's a presentation on the budget and medium-term financial plan, or MTFP for short, and the decision-making process, governance and safeguards. We're going to have a presentation on this process from our Chief Financial Officer, Adam Richins, and there are some PowerPoint slides, and the first one is already up on our screens. So, Mr. Richins, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And as you said, this presentation is on a subject matter that actually was specifically requested from Audit and Governance Committee. I think it was something that was specifically put forward by the Vice Chair, Eleanor Connolly, as part of the process of determining the issues that this committee wanted to understand in a little bit more depth, as part of, as you referred to, those non-core items. So today I'm going to give you a very short presentation on the budget and medium-term financial plan decision-making process, the governance and the safeguards. So to start with, I think the first reflection is on those 2 key aspects, i.e. what is governance and what is the budget. With regards to governance, what I like to refer to governance as, it's about doing the right things in the right way for the right people in a timely, inclusive, open and transparent, honest and accountable manner. My understanding is that, chimes with many of the visions and the objectives of the council. But further to that, I think it's also about the framework for managing the council as to who can make decisions, who can act on behalf of the council, and who is accountable for how the council and its staff behave. Moving on, I think it's fair to reflect that when it comes to good governance, this is often something that is presented to this committee, whether that's via the annual governance statement, whether that's the local code of governance or the internal audit charter, by referring to this good governance wheel, as I referred to it, but better described as the good governance framework diagram. It contains 7 specific aspects, starting with the first that focus on behaviour, integrity, respecting the law. It moves on to consider openness. It reflects on setting out the financial, social and environmental outcomes in respect of any decisions. It looks at the interventions needed to achieve the specific outcomes. It considers capacity. It considers. Yeah, I'm going to just pause slightly. It considers capacity. It considers managing risks, internal control framework, and strong financial management. And sorry, it's a bit distracting. And it also considers the transparency with regards to reporting and the effectiveness of the audit process. So that is your basic principles of governance. And I think that is something that through this committee, we've considered on numerous occasions as we consider those key documents throughout any particular fiscal year. And then having considered the governance, I think it's then worth just reflecting on what is a budget. You know, a budget is a financial expression of the council's ambitions and priorities. A budget is needed to enable the council to plan, authorise, monitor and control the way money is allocated and spent. The budget and, if you like, the council must ensure those resources are required in accordance with the law and are duly and properly authorised, are used only for the purpose of achieving policy objectives and service priorities, that those resources are held securely when not required, which is principally a reference to our treasury management function. There is also a particular issue and responsibility of the Audit and Governance Committee, and actually that those resources are used appropriately to avoid waste, inefficiency and or loss. In regards to a council budget, it is unlawful for the council to budget for a deficit. And when we refer to budgeting for a deficit, that means that we have to set a balanced budget, and that balance can be including the use of reserves. And clearly during the early years of BCP Council, we have actually used reserves to help set a balanced budget on a number of occasions. The budget is produced annually, and it is normally delivered in the context of a 3-year medium-term financial plan. In fact, that is a requirement of the Council's financial regulations. The budget will also include your capital programme and your treasury management statement. The important thing when it comes to reflecting on your budget is to highlight that services therefore corporate directors, service directors and budget holders are required to manage their income and expenditure within the cash limits of the resources allocated to them. If anybody's got any questions, I should have said, please ask them as we go through.
Councillor Way?
Is it unlawful for the council to set a budget hoping that the DSG override will be extended at the end of March next year? No, it's not next year, is it? 2026. So it's a problem perhaps for next year, but you can tell us.
So in reference to the DSG override, that is a question that I posed external legal support, because it is something that when it comes to setting the budget for 25-26, I was concerned about as your Section 151 officer. I was concerned about my statutory responsibilities. The legal advice was because that statutory guidance falls 11:59 on the last day of that financial year, it is something that I do not need to concern myself for the financial year 25-26, but I will need to concern myself for 26-27. But clearly that is something that needs and has, through this process I've tested, with those external legal support. Clearly when it comes to 25-26, what I am concerned about with regard to balancing the 25-26 budget and SEND is the ability to continue to cash flow a deficit, which by the time we get to 25-26 will be in all likelihood in excess of £100 million. How am I going to find the cash to carry on paying those checks? Because at the moment I'm doing that through internal treasury management. But when we get into 25-26, I think that flexibility, that headroom that I currently got will, be all exhausted, and therefore I'll reach that point where something's going to have to change. And that's the reason that I wrote to the Director of Finance at MHCLG on the 22nd of May. And that through those conversations since, we know that they're potentially looking into our BCP position, and hopefully they'll provide me with advice and guidance as to how I can advise you in the setting of a lawful balanced budget for 25-26.
You want to come back on that?
Yes, please. When you say difficulty, finding the money to make those bills, sorry, I haven't quoted you exactly correctly. Is that because unlike, myself, it's a case of, putting things on a credit card, isn't it? But I suppose in the council, it's you pay for these things and then you're finding the borrowing arrangements. There's a bit of a lag. And is that what you mean by the cash flow difficulty? Because I don't think I've understood.
In a sense, you're quite right. In the sense, if we look back to the basic principles of local government finance, is that I can only borrow for capital expenditure. The DSG, high needs SEND service expenditure, is revenue expenditure. So I can't borrow for that. So how do I keep paying those bills when I can't borrow from it? And I basically use all of that internal treasury management advantage that council would normally have. From the conversations with government, what I get back is we are in an extreme position as a local authority, and that because they haven't come across this situation with regards to that treasury management being exhausted before, but hopefully it's something that they are listening to and helping us work through what those solutions might be. And I know that they've engaged with the likes of SIPFA and other organisations, and DFE particularly, to help them in that understanding.
Thank you for that. Councillor Phipps, you indicated.
Yeah, it's just the last line really. Services are required to manage their income and expenditure within cash limits of the budget allocated to them. Obviously, there's certain departments that, due to statutory obligations, they can't do that.
No.
They just can't do it. So.
No.
Okay.
What the chief exec will say to every budget holder is always seek permission, not forgiveness. That's what he will say to any officer or budget holder. So if a service that's slip of the tongue there, if a service that's providing a statutory service looks at it and says, well, actually, based on all those statutory requirements, I do not think I'm forecasting ahead that I'll be able to live within that cash limit, then what they have to do is, based on that forecast, present something to council, or cabinet or officers, depending on the thresholds, to adjust their budget and to increase that budget, and to consider what the consequences are, and go through that proactive process rather than the reactive process and say, well, we just overspent because it's statutory, we couldn't control our budget. It's supposed to be proactive rather than reactive.
Come back, yeah.
Fair enough, but if you haven't got the money, how can then officers or the council or whatever say, yeah, that's all right, well, you can have it anyway because it's statutory obligation, but we haven't got the money. So, it's ridiculous. It's chicken and egg, or it's putting us further into deficit.
But ultimately, if you put the SEND issue to one side, but in regards to normal budget, general fund budgets, we're supposed to have that proactive decision, because ultimately we've got to balance the books. So if you've got a service that wants to spend more than its budget, we've got to be in a proactive situation, confident that we've got the means of actually financing that issue, or that expenditure. The SEND issue is slightly outside of that, because the government's given us permission to park it off balance sheet over there somewhere, and that's the difficulty.
Councillor Adams, you indicated.
So I'm quite new to this committee, so I might be vastly misunderstanding. But in relation to the DSG and the cash flow difficulties we have, though, there's quite a lot of other authorities that are in the same position with the DSG deficits, right? So how? And you said we're one of the only ones that have the sort of cash flow problems. What are they doing that we're not, or how did we get into the position with the actual cash flow issues when the other authorities with the same problem aren't there yet, or have I completely misunderstood it? I don't know. I might be.
Well, it's
What have you got?
yeah, it's difficult to advise you on other local authorities, you know, and what other local authorities do or don't do. Well, we've got to recognise that our deficit compared to the size of our authority is at the extreme end. Other local authorities have bigger deficits than us, but they are bigger local authorities than us as part of, you know, so we've got to recognise that, you know, as part of that process. And, you know, I think at the moment we're spending probably in excess of £30 million more in expenditure on the SEND service than we're getting by way of the government grant, and the government grant is only about £40 million a year.
Okay. So back to one of our independent members. You indicated next, and Councillor
Thank
Slade
you.
after.
Adam, this is huge what you're doing. I'd like to know, do you feel personally, because you're leading through this, do you feel that there are sufficient processes and support systems in place to help you take us through this successfully, or is there more that councillors or the council officers could do to support you with doing this and reassure me that you're not feeling like a lone soldier and that you've got everything you need, because you are key in this one, and so is Councillor Fox.
Well, you know, I would emphasise that, you know, it is critical for any authority and any Section 151 officer facing the kind of position we're facing to ensure that there is that appropriate support mechanisms around them, whether that be the portfolio holder, the leader, or other members of the corporate management team. Clearly, I can't talk about the service itself and the management of the SEND service. That would be something for Kathy Hadley and Sharon Mundun to do, and I think there will be a report coming to October Cabinet, which will be worth, you know, members familiarising themselves with, because clearly it will set out some of the challenges that the services face. I'll bring it back to, in answering your question, however, is being Section 151 can be a lonely position. That's why I am looking to the structured support mechanisms to give me that advice. Those structural support mechanisms include reaching out to MHCLG via that letter that I did on the 22nd of May to seek their advice and guidance on how I can advise you. It also involved making sure I'm keeping the likes of SIPA involved, you know, and aware of the issues, because again, Section 151 officer, they've got a key role in advising me in my statutory capacity. So, you know, I think it's a difficult question. You know, I think it's a difficult position to be in, but hopefully by taking early proactive action, you know, hence the letter in May, the correspondence between the previous leader of the council and the current leader of the council with government ministers, trying to ensure that everybody is cited on this issue and helping me discharging my duties, you know, is one for which I'm grateful.
Can I just add to that question?
Yes.
To say that actually we cannot solve it. BCP cannot solve this issue. It is entirely down to government to solve. We just do not have the resources to. It's such a huge issue that it's down to government, and we've made that very clear in the letters that we've sent, and there's another one going out tomorrow. That, you know, we can't do this. You're going to have to step in, otherwise we go bust. Because it's just not possible.
Thank you for that. Councillor Slade, you've got a question?
Yeah, thank you. It's three little ones, if that's okay, Councillor Andrews. First is in relation to the cliff edge. So my understanding is that this is not the only cliff edge which has been left. Obviously, we've got this statutory override that runs to 2026, but there are other funds that local governments get, for example, on homelessness and other things, which have pretty steep cliff edges as well. In the information you've got so far from your conversations with government, I'm assuming that MHCLG and the like are aware that councils around the country are hanging on every word about whether these
various cliff edges are going to be pushed further away, because that is a common problem for everybody. The second piece is around what Councillor Adams was saying about why is our situation worse. Am I right in thinking that although our deficit compared to our size is big, the other problem is our deficit in relation to what's left of our reserves, which used to be significant and are no longer significant. They may well have been allocated reserves, but they're gone, is part of the problem. And the third thing is around the ask permission, not forgiveness. Given that the spending around the dedicated schools grant and the high needs block are for primarily statutory services, how can you give a department the autonomy to do what it has to do and what it's doing? The parents have a right to those children to be educated in the way that they are, but then also say they need to get permission and we could stop doing it. I don't understand how we could stop doing something which is an absolute right of a family to have.
Do you want to deal with those one by one?
Can I just declare an interest?
Yep.
In that I am a parent of a child with an EHCP, so you probably, given that we're talking about the statutory override, it's probably worth me declaring a personal interest.
Okay, I'll attempt to answer those questions in reverse. And I suppose with regards to reflection on statutory service, I hope I didn't give the impression we would look to stop to deliver statutory services. The intention is to have a proactive discussion around ensuring the finances in place to enable those statutory services to continue to be made. That's the important bit, that proactive process. With regards to the use of reserves, it is fair to say that if our reserves were £2 billion, we wouldn't be having this issue, because your reserves would be part of that treasury management flexibility that would enable you to manage it. And because we have reduced the significant amount of reserves that we did have over the last 3 or 4 years, then that means that we're in a position where we haven't perhaps got that headroom that we would have previously had we still had those reserves in place. With regards to the cliff edge, I think you're right to reflect that there will be, most councils up and down the country will be waiting for clarification as to what the new government's policy and approaches will be. And a lot of them will be looking to the 30th of October budget, particularly as a source of indication as to what sources of funding might continue to the future and what options and flexibilities might be given to the councils to help manage any of those specific issues.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got a question or a poser to you. I think you will have the answer. Regularly as councillors, we get asked about why can't you do this, why can't you do that, like new play equipment, please, or resurface that road. Obviously, they're non-statutory obligations. How much, in terms of percentage of our total budget, is statutory obligations, like obviously adult social care, children's social care, things like that? What percentage roughly would it be?
I think the right the answer that I would give is actually we haven't ever gone to the process of defining exactly what services are statutory, what services are non-statutory, and therefore how does that budget break down? Because there are degrees. So a good example is libraries. We all know libraries is a statutory function, but we don't have to deliver 20 libraries that we do at the moment. So define the extent to which the budget for the library service is statutory, non-statutory. We haven't invested time, energy, capacity in doing a detailed costing to work out what that potentially would look like. And I think that's the issue, is that there are many statutory services we deliver. We perhaps don't necessarily have to deliver them to the extent to which we do deliver them, as part of the decisions that we've made in setting budgets, either for this year or in the past.
Okay, thank you for that. You got more of your presentation. Yeah. So with that intro, and there will be another session for questions and statements after the second part. Over to Mr. Richards.
Excuse me, I think you're on mute, Adam.
Sorry, yeah, apologies. So every year we set out the budget process. The budget process generally starts with, if you like, the setting of the budget for the forthcoming year. So in this year, in February this year, on the, I think it was the 20th of February, we set the budget for 24-25. And then what we have is a process of 3 medium-term financial plan update reports, with then in the following February, the budget for the following year being set. Regards to those MTFP update reports, in the past, in certain years, we actually have increased the number of those reports depending on the specifics that underpin the budget that's got to be set. That budget is supported by a level of scrutiny. At its bare minimum level, is each of those budget reports is available for the Overview and Scrutiny Board to consider and to scrutinise. But as I'll come on to as part of this presentation, you'll see that we have enhanced the scrutiny arrangements in regards to the 25-26 budget setting process. And what we include in that is regular updates by way of presentations to an all-member seminar, something we've referred to as budget cafes or budget workshops in the past, that help ensure that all members are engaged in that process. When it comes to the actual process, the setting of the budget, the detailed policy decisions, the difficult choices is something that we do via a bi-weekly corporate management board cabinet strategic planning session, where we start to build the detail of the budget, we look at those options, we consider those policy and ambitions of the council, and we ensure that those finances are wrapped around and prioritised in line with those objectives. The budget process will involve, if you like, public engagement. Every year we tend to slightly adapt it, but normally it's at least some kind of public engagement exercise in September, October, November that normally lasts for about 6 weeks. But on top of that, we also have a statutory responsibility to consult with commerce and industry, and we normally do that in early February, and that is something that normally in the past, leaders of the council and portfolio holder for finance have been involved in a session with those specific sectors. From a budget holder's point of view, there is that constant ongoing process of identifying challenges, identifying pressures, identifying options for savings and efficiencies, and bringing it together in that conversation with cabinet in that informal session, so that we can start to put those proposals forward for council for consideration. We then have a finance team that is fundamentally designed to support each one of those processes. But at the same time, we also have to be mindful of the strategic planning cycle, which, when we started this process for this year, included the police and crime commissioners election and the by-election that took place in May. But then, if I was to update the slide again, we would then overlay the fact that we had a general election as well that was called, because, I think previously, before it was called, we just knew that it would be happening sometime this year, but we was unsure as to when. So that's the basic, if you like, budget process. My slide seems to have gone to sleep. What's going on here? I just check I didn't miss one. What happened there? Okay, so the normal formal budget framework is just to highlight at the start of that the leader and cabinet are responsible for developing budget proposals, working with officers of the council. Leader and cabinet are responsible for proposing the budget to full council, and leader and cabinet are responsible for monitoring the performance against that budget as we go through the specific year. Council's responsibility is actually for formally setting the budget. And as part of that budget setting process, any alternative budget proposals submitted by a councillor or group of councillors must be done so and advised to the Chief Financial Officer and no less than 3 working days before the budget setting meeting itself. So for this financial year, the budget setting meeting was on the 20th of February. which was a Tuesday. By the end of play on the Wednesday before, which this year happened to be Valentine's Day, councillors or a group of councillors had the opportunity to submit to me any alternatives or budget amendments as part of the process. For this year, and for years therefore going forward, as we've discussed previously in Audit Governance Committee, we have updated the council's constitution with regards to the rules around the budget, and we've amended the budget and policy framework procedure rules. So what this does is it slightly changes how any proposed amendments or alternatives might play through that council decision making process. And the next slide goes through it in a bit more of a graphical format, but basically it means if the leader accepts an objection or fails to act in a specific period of time, then the budget as amended will become effective. If the leader disagrees with the council's objection, or proposes to submit a revised proposal in light of the objection, then the council would then be required to meet again to reconsider. So what it means is there's a lot of, if like, emphasis put on the leader and the cabinet as to whether or not they propose to accept any amendments or adjustments put forward, as to actually how it would play out in that council meeting in February. So just to probably explain that maybe easier by looking at this table, is that if cabinet recommends a budget to council and council agrees the cabinet amended budget, then that is the end of the process. However, if council rejects the cabinet proposal or amends the cabinet recommended budget, then council has to give notice to the leader of their objection within 5 working days that they will have to respond. The leader can accept that objection or can take no action. If they accept it or take no action, then it's the end of the process again. And clearly that can happen on the night in the council chamber. But if the leader doesn't accept the objection, then they will be given the opportunity to resubmit their original budget or a revised budget, taking account of the objection, and then council will be asked to reconsider that budget. And at that stage, clearly it can either say it accepts the revised budget of the leader, or it just confirms the budget and decision that it made previously. So hopefully it gives a little bit more time for consideration of any potential amendments or alternatives that are potentially put forward as part of those updated policy and framework procedure rules, which were part of the update to the Constitution that happened earlier this year. So with regards to budget safeguards, I think there are several main safeguards. The first of which is what's referred to as the Section 25 report, which is the formal advice of your Chief Financial Officer. It's included in the budget report in summary format, but then what you do for this year, you had what's referred to as Appendix 10, which was the formal separate report from the CFO in regards to the budget proposal that was in front of council for consideration. This Section 25 report has a tendency in the last couple of years to be co-authored by the Chief Exec. And what it does is it highlights the robustness of the budget estimates and the adequacy of the reserves. Those are the key elements that it's supposed to be focusing in on. But clearly, as CFO, I'll be also focusing on the financial risks associated with those estimates and that reserve position. The protocol that we have as a council is that independent advice will be taken on any unusual or innovative items. So in regards to the 24/5 budget, remember we took some independent advice from our treasury management consultants in regards to the adjustment we made to our MRP policy. And that was something that's clearly discussed with Audit and Governance Committee as part of that process. The other safeguard is clearly there's a legal advice section in the report where the council's monitoring officer has the opportunity to give any specific advice that they would want council to be aware of in regards to the budget as being proposed. The third safeguard is the safeguard of the external auditor. So, the external auditor will monitor the budget process through the formal reports and through informal conversations with the portfolio holder of finance, the chief exec, and the director of finance, which they tend to meet independently of each other. They retain the ability to provide advice to the leader or council. So as a reflection back, you'll remember in 2023, the then administration was proposing a potential amendment to its own budget. They were clearly given advice by initially me as a Section 151 officer, but then also as the external auditor, which meant that alternative proposal never saw the light of day as part of that process. And then what the external auditor also can do is comment on the financial sustainability of the authority. The other safeguards are budget monitoring. So we have a rigorous budget monitoring process. We have 4 quarterly budget monitoring reports that come to Cabinet, which can be scrutinised. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Certainly the Q1 report for 24-25 was something that the Overview and Scrutiny Board spent some time considering prior to Cabinet's consideration of it earlier in this week, because that budget monitoring is also always about trying to maintain that financial equilibrium for the council. What we also have is specific environment rules. So environment is where we transfer budget from one area to another area because of circumstances change. It's a dynamic organisation, but we have a specific part of our constitution, the financial regs, that will say to us that in certain circumstances, if we do move money between parts of the organisation, then it has to be a council decision if it's over £1 million. It has to be a cabinet decision if it's over £500,000, but less than that £1 million. And then you've got different thresholds for corporate directors and service directors. All those decisions are only taken after the advice of the Director of Finance has been received, and the Director of Finance is given delegated authority to correct any slight budget errors that inevitably make their way into the system in such a large organisation, or to distribute centrally held budgets, provided there's no change to the council tax requirement. And a good example of that is we budget for the pay award as a fixed sum, an amount of money, and then when eventually we do get a decision around the pay award, then we allocate that fixed sum to the services based on actually what decisions have been made and as to what the final outcome of that pay award actually was. Question?
Just a quick one on the environments thing. Sorry, I'm again not sure what I'm going on about sometimes. But do you do a report of all the stuff that's changed as part of the budget monitoring process? Because I'm sure it'd be quite helpful to know for some people that may be more interested than me.
Yeah, as part of the budget, as part of the environment process, we highlight all of those environments that are either in the cabinet or council thresholds, because they need that separate independent authorization, to obtain their prior agreement before they're enacted.
Is that okay?
Yeah. So the last element of the presentation is just to give you an update with regards to the scrutiny arrangements, because for 25-26 budget setting, we've looked to enhance these scrutiny arrangements. And I broke it down into 9 specific steps. The first step was on the 29th of July. A previous Section 151 officer gave an independent presentation to all councillors on budget skills training that was undertaken by Andrew Harlingham, who was the previous Plymouth Section 151 officer. We've then in September got a series of what I called Directorate Budget Awareness Sessions. So this is where each corporate director will give a presentation to each relevant scrutiny committee to undertake a question and answer session on the specifics around what their budget looks like, the pressures they face, what savings have been assumed within the medium-term financial plan. And as part of that step 2, what the scrutiny committee will be asked to do is identify 1, 2, or 3 specific areas within the remit of the overview and scrutiny committee, the relevant scrutiny committee, that they want to undertake, if you like, a task and finish consideration of that budget in more detail during October. So having then, if you like, considered that budget in more detail, they can potentially then provide advice and recommendations to the overview and scrutiny board so it can be considered as part of the budget process. So that's step 3. Step 4 will have the normal November budget presentation, which all members will be invited to. In November, what we'll also have is the overview and scrutiny board receiving feedback from each of the overviews, each of those scrutiny committees on their deep dives and any recommendations they would make in regards to those budgets. Then in January, we'll have another all-member presentation on what the budget is looking like post-budget consultation, post the draft local government finance settlement for 25-26. And we'll then have a scrutiny committee on the 3rd of February, where they can look at all the details of the final proposed recommendations to Cabinet, and then you'll have the normal Cabinet and Council processes as part of the overall scrutiny framework, but hopefully a little bit more enhanced than they have been in the past, particularly with regards to the engagement of the relevant scrutiny committees in the consideration and development of the budget process. Chair, I'm going to stop there, and I'm quite happy to take any further questions.
So any more, Councillor Phipps? Oh, sorry, Sam Acton, sorry, bad eyesight.
Thank you ever so much, Adam. I think I kept up with everything. 2 questions, if you don't mind. The statutory and non-statutory numbers that you showed us, so the budgets? No. Yeah, statutory and non-statutory things. You talked about libraries. It seems to me that it's not too far in the future when you're going to really need to know that information, because some tough decisions are going to be made. Is there any plan to address that and do some classifications? I know it's going to be a tough one to do and a bit heartbreaking in places, but being prepared may help get through this.
I think it's fair to say that in considering that statutory non-statutory issue, we look to advice and guidance that have been done on defining those boundaries by the likes of the organisations such as the LGA. So we are tapped into information sources in that regard. But I think in proposing what was for 23-24, £34 million worth of savings and efficiencies, for 24-25 was £38 million of savings and efficiencies, then services, corporate directors, budget holders, portfolio holders have had those kind of conversations in trying to understand the boundaries within their services, so they understand where those thresholds are. So what can be put forward for way of saving and efficiency, and what can't be as part of that process. But clearly it will be something that we are, in the current climate at least, going to have to keep challenging ourselves about, I think.
Thank you for that. And then my second question is that new word for me, virulence. So budget sums, the transferring budget sums that are there. When were those sums last reviewed, and who actually approves those amounts to make the decisions to how that comes down the line?
Council, when it sets the budget, for any year, sets out the budget for each individual service area. So council decides those amounts for which they wishes to spend on each individual service. The constitution, those values, a million, half a million, is something that comes through the constitution, is something that's been tested on several occasions when we were forming the council and annually thereafter, as to what are those appropriate values for councillors this size. There are some elements of the financial regulations where there has been, if you like, previous pressure to say some of those rules around values are too low. Clearly, in the past, we've benchmarked them compared to other local authorities of similar sizes and members, because they're the ones ultimately for the Constitutional Working Party have deemed it that those values are the right values. But every year they'll go through as part of that review process to see whether or not there's any justification, any desire, and any requirement to potentially change those values.
Councillor Cox.
Yeah, just as an example, there's an environment going through at the moment, of £5 million from adults social services to children's services, because what happened was when the budgets finally, or when the accounts were finally drawn up, we found that there was actually adult social care didn't need £5 million. It was over budgeted effectively. So what we did was move £5 million from adult social care to children's services, because they were overspending because of the pressures at children's services. So that seemed blindingly obvious that we should make that adjustment, and both services accepted it. But in terms of who initiated it, I suspect it was Adam.
Well, it had been part of that test and challenge around the robustness of the budget, but to give you the assurance, that specific environment as referred to is a council decision. I think council, when it meets in October, will be asked to consider that environment and decide whether or not they wish to approve that environment. And my understanding is that the chair of the relevant scrutiny committee will probably give it some attention before it gets to council to test and challenge its robustness beforehand.
He has promised to do so.
Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, if we go back to the definition Adam gave of the budget is the expression of the council's policies and objectives. When at the end of the day, those levels are judgment. But if you did a straw poll of the public and you said you were moving £1 million from one place to another place, that's a pretty fundamental change of your policy and your aspirations. So that's why that's a council decision, because they set the budget in the first place.
No, absolutely. I understand that, and I'm delighted to see that there is that provision in place. It's just when you're going into tougher times, I would pull it even tight, the whole thing even tighter, and make it more scrutiny involved in making the decision even at the lower amounts, because there comes a point where you have to look after the pennies to make the pounds look after themselves. So that's kind of where I was coming from. I wanted to understand how you got at those figures and how often they're reviewed, because in the context of what's coming, that could be another thing to think about. You have to keep things so tight and so under control in rocky times.
I've got a query. I misinterpreted Sam Axton's question about those thresholds of $500,000, 1 million, or whatever. You mentioned that they're in the Constitution. Obviously, this council started in BCP started in 2019. Since then, we've had quite a lot of inflation, particularly in 2022 when it was 13 or 15% RPI for some reason. Is there any intention to move those thresholds up? Because obviously what you could buy for $1 million in 2019, you can't now.
All I can say is it's an annual consideration of the Constitutional Working Party as to whether or not those thresholds should be changed. So to give you a slightly related kind of example, in the past, we've suggested to councillors that the rules with regards to, say, the disposal of council assets should be changed, because at the moment it says any asset greater than £350,000 is a cabinet decision, and anything greater than, from memory, I think it's £500,000 is a council decision. And we suggested, well, perhaps because actually, most homes these days, actually just one property would fall within that £350,000 bracket. So we've suggested that those thresholds were increased. However, the Constitutional Working Party disagreed with us and have kept them at those levels consistent with what they were in 2019.
I've got Councillor Connolly, who's actually the current chairman of the Constitutional Working Party. Over to you.
Yes, not entirely on that point though. So if anybody else wanted to come in on that point before we move on. No. Okay, I have one comment and two questions. So the comment is, well, I suppose it's more of a reflection. Is further to Sam Acton's comment about this process of trying to clarify what is statutory obligation and what is not, and the levels, as you describe, how it's not that clear. And exactly as she says, that the more challenging this is going to become over the coming years, the more helpful it will be for decision making to have additional clarity over how much flexibility that there really are on certain decisions. So it's a plea or a suggestion that the more work that can be done on analysing where the discretion actually lies in some of the decisions, the better. So my two quick questions. One is the role of internal audit and indeed A&G in this process. If you could talk about that a little bit, that would be helpful. And the other question is, in presenting to the relevant scrutiny committees, are you comfortable that nothing is missed through that, and that the substance is adequately captured by the scrutiny committees? There isn't anything falling through the gaps there. Hope that's
Mr. Richards.
Tell me if you want me to go over any of those questions again.
So if I take them in reverse order with regards to whether anything's met, when it comes to those presentations to scrutiny committees in September, the whole budget will be presented, all the service budgets will be presented to each one of those committees. So they will have the opportunity to consider, if you like, the whole service budget as part of that process, and it will be for them to decide as to those areas that they want to undertake those deeper dives on, based on an assessment, I imagine, of risk, and particularly volatile areas might be areas that they want to maybe delve a bit deeper into. So hopefully from that respect, nothing falls down any cracks with regards to being at least open to that scrutiny process. With regards to this committee's engagement in the process, clearly, as we're doing tonight, we are always responsible for and considering whether or not those governance arrangements in place are appropriate and adequate, and what are those, if you like, internal audit and control environment like for managing the day-to-day operation of the council's finances. This committee does have specific responsibilities, as we know, with regards to the Treasury management budget. And clearly this committee is critical as part of the extra levels of checks and balances that were put in by this administration, which said that if we wanted to increase the council's borrowing threshold, then previously it was in a business case and it went to council. But now what we said is actually no, that business case would also have to come to Audit and Governance Committee, because Audit and Governance Committee would need to be satisfied with actually the mechanism for servicing that debt, because you're particularly focused in on the Treasury management exercises. And both your recommendation and the recommendation of Cabinet would need to be considered by Council at the same time, because you would then, if you supported it, be recommending that debt threshold was increased alongside the business case coming through that Cabinet mechanism. So we've got that duality of consideration, just looking at it maybe from slightly different aspects. But you also do have that overall Treasury management responsibility, hence those conversations on the MRP last year.
Councillor Cox, I know you've got to go shortly, but one final comment from you.
No, my final comment was I've got to go. So
You've got some other business over in Friarscliffe, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Claire Waite.
Thank you. I just wanted to express, I suppose, an alternative viewpoint that expressed by Samantha Acton and Eleanor Connolly regarding sort of discretion around what is statutory and non-statutory. So using the example of libraries, if we were to sort of come to a consensus that the statutory services libraries to be open 5 days a week, every single one of them, we're kind of hamstringing ourselves if the finances just get worse and worse and worse. And then if we decide that statutory means open pool for 4 hours a week, then there are people who like to save a lot of tax will then push that way. And I just think the area of sort of grey area and discretion that we have, I think that's sort of the point of having an elected council members, that they can use that discretion. So yeah, that was all.
Mr. Richards?
Well, yeah,
it's down to the councillors, you think, at the end of the day.
My only comment would be that, clearly in developing that budget, Cabinet, the portfolio holders, are considering where those boundaries lie, so that they can, if you like, in making any proposals, understand what the impact would be on our community of any of those difficult choices they've had to make in the past or in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments? No more indications. Mr. Richards, thank you very much for your presentation. Obviously, there are three normal councillors on the committee. I've got a substitute here. Councillor Beasley, Councillor Tunning and Councillor Armstrong aren't here this evening. I think it would be very useful, well, not least to circulate the slides, PowerPoint presentation to them, but also suggest that they look at the recording of this meeting, which will be on our website and YouTube or whatever, because I think it's not just the slides, it's what you've said as well, and the questions and comments. And potentially, I don't know whether the committee would think it's worthwhile, there are, well, only 75 councillors at the moment, whether it should be circulated to all councillors, the suggestion that if they can find some time, an hour of their valuable time, they should look at this presentation and consider it, because this will dovetail into what be going on and ultimately the full council meeting, and it might be useful for certainly for the newer councillors who are only elected in May 2023 to understand a bit more about the budget setting process. So what do you think, committee? Do you think we should circulate it to all councillors? Yeah, so I don't think we need to take a vote on that. They're all nodding of heads and whatever. So if you could organise that, please. And if you want, I could send it, if you could draft something up, then it comes from the chairman as opposed to, right, fine. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Richards. So that completes item 6. So therefore we move now on to item 7. It's another presentation. It's headed Procurement Arrangements, including changes resulting from the Procurement Act 2023. And this is quite opportune because the Act actually doesn't come into effect until next month. And so therefore it's very topical. The officer that presenting this evening can't be with us because of so I think he had a minor operation recently, but basically we've got Stuart Bicknell, who is the interim head of procurement. He might correct me in terms of his job title, but he's been with the council since we were created in 2019. I think prior to that he was with Poole Borough Council, and I think you are joining us online. So can I pass over to you with your presentation,
Hi.
Stuart?
Sure, and you got all the details right there. Phil, I see you've just come on. Did you want to introduce us at all?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Chair. A very brief introduction from me, and then I'm going to hand over to Stuart because he is the expert in this. So this is really an overview of the way that the council seeks to procure goods, services and works and concessions, and hopefully is helpful in understanding our requirements linked to the new Procurement Act, but also some of the requirements we've had around compliance with the current legal arrangements that we need to follow. So, and obviously an opportunity for members to ask us questions either as we go through or at the end, and we'll just leave it to you to raise your hands and Chair for you to manage that on our behalf. Thank you. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks. So I think just by way of building on something Phil's just said there, it is worth just reflecting on the fact that we have been operating within a regulatory framework for years. So this isn't, whilst there's new regulations coming into force end of October, we're well versed with working within the confines of set of regulations. So I've got a few slides I'll take you through, if I can make that work. Okay, so the team is a corporate team currently sitting within Phil's directorate, but moving to finance with Adam at the end of September. It is a centre of expertise as defined by KPMG with the work that they did a couple of years ago. Team's currently got 24 FTEs. 12 of those are effectively procurement, and the other 12 focused very much on contract management. And a large proportion of those are contract management within adult social care. The service is organised by category. We have a category manager, team manager for wellbeing, used to be referred to as people, team manager for operations, which was previously place, and the third one for the resources category. The role includes what I've recently learned is referred to as the second line defence, first line being line management. And that's particularly true with procurements valued at over £30,000. There's different rules for procurements under 30 that we'll look at in a second. The governance side of things is essentially it's set out by Part G of BCP's financial regulations, and we work in compliance with that. And so whilst there is a very strong, heavy compliance side, the last point on that slide is to identify opportunities for organisation-wide contracts and frameworks, which is largely about driving better value for the council, better value for money through the acting at scale and the price leverage we get with volume. So the normal governance arrangements is, like I say, we comply with Part G, and Part G also just points to public contract regulations, PCR 15. Also, actually, the concession contract regulations 2016. It's part of the scope of what we cover as well. Adverts above 30 grand are controlled by the procurement team, and they are placed on Supply in South West, which is the regional portal, and that has a direct feed through to Contracts Finder, which is the England and Wales platform, and it also has a direct feed through to Find a Tender Service, which is the UK platform. And all of those platforms are linked together in the background. I mentioned that below 30,000, there's a slightly different process, and that is essentially it's email quotes, which are led by the service. Procurement get involved to approve those under the CFO's expenditure control process, and we ensure that where that is a contract that's being placed rather than a spot purchase, then details of that contract do go through to the contracts register. So that's BCP's contracts register, again, regulatory requirement. All contracts with a value over 5,000 do have to be published in the public domain. The contract register also works for us in an automated way, in that we set review dates where it's a recurrent procurement. So if it was a 5-year contract, we might set a review date after 3.5 years, 4 years. That emails the inbox, we then pick it up, and it gives us plenty of time to review the council's requirements and look at lessons learned, revise specifications, quality questions, KPIs, T's and C's, all that kind of stuff, and re-procure it, assuming it's still needed. The procurement decision records that we operate are an internal control mechanism, and they are an input to the CFO's expenditure control. That it's not entirely driven by expenditure control. It is a process that we have anyway, and we had prior to expenditure control, and it's to ensure that initiatives are supported by well, they make business sense, basically, at different gateways as we go through those journeys. So as we start to invest resource into defining a project, a procurement, there's approval by the SRO that it is something that aligns strategically with what BCP wants to be doing, and that there is sufficient budget that gets signed off by accountancy so that we know that we are only pursuing things that are budgeted. Before we go out to actually procure something, there's another gateway that we pass through that requires approval. Before we award a contract, there's another gateway that we pass through, again recorded in these decision records. And prior to extending any contracts, again we do that review so that there is a controlled gateway that goes through. Now all of this is current process under the current regulations, independent from changes coming later in the month, next month. Flexibility is afforded to us currently. Again, this is current flexibilities, so we work within finance regs still. With works contracts that are above £30,000 but below the PCR 15 threshold, which is for works, it's actually 4.5 million. No, it's not. It was 4.5. It's now 5.4. We are able to make decisions to just advertise opportunities more locally, but we would only do that where we know that the local market has got capability and capacity to do that. So if it was a particularly large and complex contract where we knew that the local market wasn't sufficiently geared up to do that, we would go straight to a national advert rather than exploring that with local market first. Part G of BCP's finance regs do give us 4 circumstances that were previously referred to as waivers. They are we record those within procurement decision records so that we can report on those, and we link up with Nigel Stannard's team for that purpose, and those 4 circumstances are just set out on that slide. So moving on, starting to look at the impact of the procurement regulations 24, and they are built out of the Procurement Act 23. So it's 2 pieces of legal work there that we refer to, and it all comes into force 28th of October. So the first couple of general considerations I wanted to mention is that this new regulation does replace multiple previous regulations. So PCR 15 is the public contract regulations, CCR 16 concession contract regulations. Both of those are crashed together under the new set of regulations. There's other elements that come together in this as well, but they don't really apply to us as a local authority. And procurements and contracts that are running under the existing regime, PCR 15, they remain under PCR 15. We don't have to start managing them under the new regulations. We stick with existing law on those. I've then set out a few changes under different sections of planning and defining a procurement, and then going to market and awarding. So I'll just run through those. So and this is very much geared now around changes, stuff we've got to do differently. So the new regulations introduce a pipeline notice, and what that notice is to publish a forward-looking list, if you like, of the procurements that we intend to take to market over the coming 18 months. There's 2 reasons that the government's introduced this one. One is there's obvious benefit to suppliers so that they're sighted on business growth opportunities regionally, and they can think about where they want to sharpen their pencils and try and win business. And the other one, significant benefits for the public sector organisations themselves, in that it helps us to ensure that we're geared up for procurements that are coming towards us, and particularly important with capital schemes where parts of the council have historically they've applied for grants for large sums of money, which have large impact in procurement, but we haven't necessarily had sufficient sight of those in advance so that we can gear up in terms of capacity. So the pipeline notice is designed to benefit us in that respect as well. And you'll notice that a few of these they're all referred to as notices, and that they're published within that systems environment, which is the Supply in the Southwest, Contracts Finder, Finder Tender Service. They're electronic notices that are published in that domain. So preliminary market engagement notices. Previously, we've referred to them as primary information notices. So it's not a completely new thing, and we've been able to use the PINs historically to engage with the market, so that we can learn from the market before we actually go out with a procurement, and we can get market feedback to help inform our requirements, and we learn from the market. We understand what innovation's going on, and we can factor that in, so that we're not simply trying to do stuff that we're familiar with already, but we're asking the market to inform us how the market has moved on. So that's the preliminary engagement notice. There's new requirements on conflicts of interest. It just formalizes and tightens that up. Key performance indicators is a very positive move forward, and that is, it's saying that where we're going out to market with a contract with a whole life value more than 5 million, we must include at least 3 KPIs. We also subsequently have to report performance against those metrics, which is also very positive in terms of transparency. All of these things are positive in terms of transparency, to be fair. So changes under the procure stage. 3 procedures going forward, which is the open procedure, is the same as our open procedure currently. Flexible procedure. It brings together a couple of existing procedures, and it gives us some design authority where we can come up with bespoke procurements. There is risk associated with that we can't be led by services that don't understand the legal impact of these things, and again, that's where procurement adds defence to what we're actually doing. And it is a flexibility that we have taken advantage of over the years. In any case, it's more formally laid out in the law now, and it's encouraged as well, so that's good. Conditions of participation is changing terminology, really. That was previously referred to as standard supplier questionnaire. It's a UK government standard tool that we're obliged to use. So it's largely been renamed, changed to format as well, but minor stuff. Central digital platform, that's the new name for the platform where suppliers register to receive automated notifications of opportunities. Currently, there's various different platforms that suppliers are expected to register on, which includes the ones I've mentioned: Supply in the Southwest, Contracts Finder, Finder Tender Service, and they disappear and are replaced by one place where suppliers enter their details, and having entered their details once, they can be reused on multiple procurements. So it's designed to certainly to benefit suppliers in terms of making it more simple for them, and for councils, it does mean there are fewer barriers to bid in for suppliers, which should encourage more participation. That's certainly the thinking. The term MEET, which was most economically advantageous tender, that has been dropped. The word economically has been dropped from it, so it becomes MAT, which is most advantageous tender. The thinking behind that is very much recognizing that there's a lot of social value that is difficult to monetize, and so talking about the most advantageous tender to public sector makes it easier to factor in social value benefits rather than making them economically significant. Tender notice is just a change in terminology. Was contract notice. It makes more sense for it to be called a tender notice. And that's the notice that we're actually placing an advert to the market. There's a transparency notice is a new requirement. That is where director awards are done. And a procurement termination notice, that's a new one. Again, that's where we end a procedure without a contract award. Contract award notice, that's existing, no change in terminology there, but the difference there is it's been reduced, well, it's changed to 8 working days rather than the 10 calendar days that it has been for many years. Contract details notice is another requirement. There's quite a few new requirements here. Contract details notice is that we, following award of contract, where the contract is valued over 5 million, we are required to publish the actual contract in the public domain so that that can be scrutinised without any barriers. And I've just mentioned then at the bottom there, increased transparency via the new notices. But the negative aspect is there is, of course, a resource impact within the procurement team. And then there's 4 new notices within the manage stage of procurement as well. So after the contract's been awarded, contract performance notice, that's where we link back to the KPIs, where I said there must be at least 3 KPIs above 5 million. And we have to report that annual KPI data in the public domain again. We also need to report breaches and poor performance. Contract change notice is where one of the contracts valued over 5 million is modified, again publishing that in the public domain. Payments compliance notice, another new one, publish 30-day payment performance statistics every 6 months. Publish quarterly information about contractual payments over 30,000. We kind of do that anyway under the transparency, the spend data that we publish in the public domain, but it's specifically drawing out payments over 30 grand. And contract termination notice, that's another new one. So where contracts come to an end for whatever reason, whether it's poor performance or a natural end, then we are required to publish details of that in the public domain as well. Lots of new notices. So there's communications are ongoing. We're only just starting to pick up really to communicate this to stakeholders, and in that sense, good to be able to present to the committee tonight. There's knowledge drops that have already been communicated with staff. We've got a speaker from SIPFA attending an online event later in the month to brief senior managers, and we'll be pushing out more comms to stakeholders over the coming 2 months as well. That is all of my presentation. It's just questions. So fire away. Can't see any hands up at the moment.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, any comments or queries? Sam Acton first.
Thank you so much for that presentation and whizzing through that. I think one question you gave the answer on the next slide, which was around the KPIs. How often are you capturing this data to ensure the contractors are delivering? Did you say it was quarterly?
No, well, contract management meetings will be they'll be different. It won't be a one-size-fits-all approach for every contract. It will be a proportionate approach for the risk associated with particular contracts, but we're required to publish it in the public domain annually. So there must be at least 3 KPIs for contracts over 5 million, and we're required to publish that performance data once a year.
Okay, can I just rephrase the question? What I'm thinking is if you're giving that size contract, rather than capturing those KPIs once a year, are you capturing them more often to make sure that the contractor is succeeding?
Yes. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
in many cases that would be monthly.
Okay, thank you.
But it might be quarterly, might be 6 monthly.
Sure. Okay. Pipeline. What will the pipeline notice be for all sizes of contracts?
No. So the we need to procurement board need to make a decision on that actually later this month. There's a couple of options that we're looking at, and the statutory requirement is that contracts valued more than 2 million whole life value must be published with that forward projection of 18 months. We can, as an authority, choose to publish lower values, but that's a decision that hasn't been taken yet.
Okay, so that's on the to-do list.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My final question is not directly within your presentation, but it links across to Mr. Redmond's statement that was read out earlier. So if you could try and help me with this one, and it might involve Nigel actually, because this falls into his arena as well. So there was reference to the 3 lines of defence detection system, which we've covered in audit and governance before, and Mr. Redmond refers to it as being retrospective. That wasn't the way I understood it. Can either both of you or one of you provide some sort of reassurance that the 3 lines of defence detection is working and it is current?
I'm happy. I'll start off with that, and if Nigel wants to come in and add.
Can I just ask a question just on that, just to help us follow what's going on? Would you mind bringing up the slide that Sam mentioned, just so we got to the context for where you talked about how it was read? Sorry, I hope you don't mind me interrupting.
Give you a couple of seconds to find that slide, Stuart.
Is that the statement that you read out from Mr. Redmond, or one of my slides?
I think, Claire, you're talking about one of Stuart's slides?
Yeah, Sam was talking about. Sorry, Sam. What was it? The 3-line defence.
The 3 lines of defence. I think you touched on it in one of your slides. There is and then Mr. Redmond talks about it. Yes, the 2nd line of defence in there. Yeah.
So so the 3 lines are line management being the first line of defence. So line management are obviously expected to make sure that the council follows procedures and policies without breaching anything. So line management can intervene prior to any commitments to spend anything or contracts being awarded. And then for where the procurement is over 30,000, procurement have got a very active 2nd line defence, because where again we're controlling what happens before any commitments to spend or award contract, because people can't publish adverts on platforms without going through procurement. We control that completely. And when it comes to evaluation and contract award, that's totally controlled by procurement. And then the 3rd line defence is where internal audit would look at stuff. And Nigel, if you want to step in there.
Yeah, thank you. Just building on those, what Stuart said there, I think the emphasis is that those 1st and 2nd line defence are very much real time. So with respect to Mr. Redmond, I don't think they are retrospective. They are real time controls. They prevent things going wrong at source. They are not 100% foolproof. That's where I do agree with Mr. Redmond. So management can miss things, strategic procurement can miss things. That's why there's 3 lines of defence, and indeed audit can miss things. So it's never 100% foolproof. But obviously 3-line defence is better than no line defence. And then specifically in terms of internal audit, we also are advice and support. We are not just compliance, and we are not just checking people do things correctly. So me and my team get phone calls all the time. I've interpreted this about financial regs. Do you agree? I think this is in the Constitution. Do you agree? So we'll give advice in real time to prevent things going wrong as well. And then of course the retrospective bit where Mr. Redmond is right is that internal audit will do some compliance checking, sample checking of things. So, for example, we will look at procurement decision records. Are they filled in correctly? In line with our expectations and our policies and procedures that we've come up with. So a good deal of disagreement with what Mr. Redmond said, but there's some elements of agreement as well.
Thank you for
Thank you
that.
for that.
So then my final question on that has to be, do we have any information to understand the effectiveness of those 3 lines of defence?
Hopefully you'll be in agreement. So in terms of Audit and Governance Committee, you get the annual breaches report. That used to be Waver's report. This year for 24-25 it will include those 4 categories that Stuart talked about in terms of procurement decision records. So where have we made those out of the ordinary flexibilities? So it's the exceptions. Are those exceptions robust? So you'll see those and you'll be able to challenge around, why did we direct award? Why did we only get 1 quote? Why didn't we get 3? That's the sort of detail you get in that appendix as a committee.
If I can just add a couple of things to that as well. So with breaches that Nige mentioned there, so procurement will report breaches to internal audit, and where we become aware of it, then we report them. And the other one is where Nigel was just commenting that the role of internal audit is real time as well as retrospective. I can certainly confirm that I will regularly consult Nigel over interpretation of anything that appears ambiguous in any way in financial regulations, and we'll have a conversation about whether anything needs to be clarified in future iterations of financial regulations, or whether it's just a training requirement to help people understand that.
Thank you for that. I've got one query or something really for you to expand upon, Stuart. You mentioned about the change due to this new act in people tendering for work, whereby once they've filled in one set of forms and been approved as an acceptable person for that particular service or supply, it's not just one local authority that they've ticked all the boxes upon. Once they've done it properly, presumably it's the whole of England and Wales whereby they could do it. I talk on the basis that my firm, well, not now, not for several years, have historically had to do a lot of form filling for Dorset Council or New Forest Council. Yeah. And different questions are being posed to us, do you have that policy or that policy? And it gets very confusing. And I think some suppliers think, I'm not wasting even more time doing that. And of course, bearing in mind the numerical number of local authorities across the country, probably this new system will improve things whereby potentially there is a supplier of a service in West Sussex, for example, that's where they're physically located, who now could supply us with children's play equipment at a lower price or better quality than historically. Can you expand on that? Is that one of the benefits of this new act?
Well, in terms of the detail of it, we need to wait and see what the system looks like. We've not had sight of that system at the moment, but certainly if we look at how things currently work, then with those 3 platforms that I mentioned, the Southwest one, Contracts Finder, Finder Tender service, with all of them, a supplier registers on them. They tick boxes for which geographical areas they're interested in opportunities, and they also tick boxes against what are known as common procurement vocabulary codes, CPV codes, and that is what are the goods, services, works that they sell that they want to see opportunities for. And then when we advertise, we have to also tick the boxes that say what the CPV code is, and it knows where we are because we are the Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole part of East Dorset, and so we tick a box for that. And any supplier that's registered to receive opportunities for the same boxes that we've ticked, they automatically receive them in their inbox. They get an automated alert. And those platforms, they work nationally already. The thinking is that rather than suppliers registering on all 3 sites, and there's other sites as well that they could choose to register on, that they just register on one site, and their data is held on that site, so that and I haven't seen this bit yet, but I'm hoping there's data that relates to their organisation that simply cascades through in a digital way. Government has certainly been trying to unlock that conundrum for years. So I'm hoping that will be the case, and it will certainly remove more barriers to small businesses, particularly doing business with the council. But some of these questions, I need to wait and see what the system actually looks like when it goes live.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Adams?
So with the changes from the requirement to go with the most economically advantageous tender to the most advantageous tender to allow for wider social benefits or whatever, well, what's the actual council's vision of how to sort of what social benefits are we going for? And also, how do we balance that with the requirement to obviously be relatively financially prudent because we're in a suboptimal financial position? So I'm trying to think things like what are we trying to base any additional options of like value, any perceptions of value? Would it be local businesses? Because I think that's brilliant. But if someone promises to solve, I don't know, world hunger or something, it might be a bit unrealistic. But what sort of things are we looking to take advantage of in that regard?
So social value, it does have to be relevant and proportionate to the subject matter of the contract. So we would struggle to procure anything that required global problems to be addressed like that. But and we don't have, as an authority, we don't yet have a joined up approach to social value across different services. So there are things that benefits that procurement can leverage that are social value benefits. I've been talking to the climate team and to economic development and to the planning team as well about how they can also leverage social value benefits. And we've started to meet and discuss this in the background. So that is a bit of a work in progress at the moment, to try and join up thinking there. And the other piece, even with procurement and looking at social value that can be delivered through procurement, ideally we would have a corporate level local needs analysis performed, which identifies what our social value priorities are for BCP as an authority. And once we have that, then we would look at the subject matter of a contract and the area that contract's being performed in, and that would give us a steer for what social value benefits we should be trying to leverage out of individual procurements. So there is some more work to do in that space to develop thinking and develop a prioritization methodology. But we're moving in the right direction. It just needs some more thinking and development.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Phipps, you indicated.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you've covered this. Apologies if you have, but do we actually have, for procurement purposes, actually lists of suppliers that do they have to be registered with us, and then you send out perhaps communication that we are looking for a contract for this, that, or the other? Or is it just open to any businesses, or is there anything on the portal that would say, if you would like to place an expression of interest in, we're looking for this, that, and the other? How does that actually work?
Yeah.
As far as suppliers are concerned.
So if we're openly advertising for something, we don't send emails directly to any suppliers. We publish the opportunity on the platforms that I was mentioning, Supply and Southwest, Contracts Finder, Finder Tender Service, and because it's all codified with the geographical areas and the codes for the goods, work, services that the supplier sells, they've already gone onto the platform and registered. These platforms got many thousands of suppliers registered on them, and they know that there's a benefit of registering because that's how they're going to win local authority, well, public sector business. And then what the system just looks for that match between the things they want to sell and the things that we want to buy, and where there's a match, the system sends them an automatic email alert to the advert that gives them all the information, so they can make a decision whether or not they want to submit a bid. So yeah, where there's an open advert, we're not cherry picking who we send invitations to. We just publish it in the public domain, and the system drives who the invitations go to based on supplier preferences that they've registered.
Thank you very much. I've got no other people indicating to comment or ask a question. So Stuart and Phil, thank you very much for your presentation. What I'm thinking is also, as we're circulating the first presentation and suggesting people actually look at the video of it as well, that we might as well include this one as well to all councillors. It's no harm that, you know, this is a new system coming in, and this is one of the things that sometimes does crop up. You know, why wasn't this done? Why wasn't that done? Well, obviously there is this new system. You know, obviously with this greater transparency, you know, equally one's got to be mindful of commercial sensitivity of information that's put online. So obviously that's something that Stuart and his team have got to be mindful about, that, you know, obviously you're going to put lots and lots of more information, apparently lots of notices, everything up online, but you know, there's obviously there's a limit as to how much you can reveal, because obviously we don't want to reveal commercially sensitive information.
If I can jump in there, the notices themselves have controlled fields on them, so you can't write anything and publish anything. It's very much controlled fields on online forms that government publish, and there's data validation checks of the data that we enter to make sure that we're only publishing what they're asking us to publish. So that means that we wouldn't fall foul of publishing stuff that should be redacted.
Okay, thank you for that reassurance. So with that, I make the time nearly 8:15. I will close this meeting. Thank you for those who've been watching online, and good evening to you. Thank you.
Thank you.